Oh, hello. My name's Greg, and as you've probably gleaned from the existence of my YouTube channel, I love movies. I've just finished putting together a new video about the new Netflix movie Bird Box, and I'm waiting for it to export so you guys can see it. In the meantime, I thought I'd lend a hand to a different project. My dad's building a home theater in his basement, see? He doesn't know I'm here, and between you and me, he doesn't really want me helping. But I don't see the harm in just hammering a few nails for him. Hammers. I don't know the first thing about hammers. I mean, I understand their function as it pertains to me, but I can't pretend to have even a passing interest in them beyond their ability to serve that function. It looks like a hammer. I guess it feels like a hammer, I don't know. I'm sure there's more to them, and probably a whole group of people who care a lot more about hammers, but not me. As long as it drives this nail into the wood, I'm good with it. After all, it's just a hammer, and it's fine. Oh, hey, the video's ready.
Here's a question for aspiring screenwriters. Is it possible to make the movie Passenger...
Oh, shoot. Sorry. Yep, okay, yep. Here we go. Here's a question for question's sake. Is it possible to make the movie Bird Box better with some relatively minor changes? You know, I don't think this is a really bad film. After hearing reviews from friends and online, I sort of expected it to be, but I think that feeling was mostly because of a very stupid meme. Bird Box is by no means a train wreck. It's just really, really derivative. Derivation is kind of a frustrating concept when it comes to something like film critique. And to illustrate what I mean, I'll compare it to a pretty similar concept, appropriation, which means to take or make use of without the owner's permission. It is an inherently neutral term describing, among other things, the dissemination of iconography regardless of the intent of those who would disseminate. But it's not difficult to see why the word carries such a weight behind it. Its negative connotation is built right into its definition. We hear appropriate and we think steal and connect the stigma of one to the other. The same could be said for the word derivative, which is basically just unoriginal with an ironic mustache. The difference is that appropriate is a verb, an action word for that thing we caught you doing, you artist, you appropriator. Get your hand out of that cookie jar and maybe your movie would be better, or less offensive, or at least an authentic experience that doesn't leave me feeling fleeced out of my time and money. It's cathartic to speak directly and concisely to the person or persons that made a bad thing, and a valuable tool for constructive criticism. I didn't like that. Don't do it again. Derivative, however, is an adjective describing a problematic state of a thing to no one in particular. I didn't like that.
Me neither.
Oh, cool.
I liked it.
Its use is often accompanied by words like lazy, lackluster, disappointing. But here's the thing. Bird Box didn't disappoint me. It pissed me off.
All of us collectively are making the end of the world great again! Yeah!
So, to start this off properly, I'm going to try my best to simply, factually recount the plot of the film without commentary, questions, or asides. All right? Let's go. We open on a radio signal telling someone there is a safe place, but it's down a river, and I don't think you can make it with kids. Mallory warns two kids about the journey ahead and the dangers of taking off their blindfolds.
If I find that you have, I will hurt you.
Mallory and her sister are at an ultrasound appointment for a baby that Mallory is not sure she is ready for or even wants.
Are you puking?
Just go to the car.
Is it chunky?
When an apparent virus that has been making people in other parts of the world kill themselves begins to affect people around them. They attempt to escape the chaos, but Mallory's sister sees something that Mallory doesn't, and her eyes turn brownish gold, and this happens. Mallory joins a group of people holding up in B.D. Wong's house as everyone scrambles for an explanation.
If you look at it, it makes you crazy or it makes you want to hurt yourself?
No, it makes you kill yourself.
Back in the boat, Mallory finds radio silence and a voice whispers her name. A pregnant woman knocks on the door and is eventually allowed to join the group, despite the protest of Machine Gun Malkovich, and we find out she has the same due date as Mallory.
October 1st. End of September.
The gang starts howling at the moon about how trapped they are, and B.D. Wong says,
Maybe we can see better than we thought.
he shows them his security system and supposes that an image might not have the same effect as seeing the creatures with the naked eye. The group ties him up in an effort to protect him from himself if things should go badly, and they all leave the room for some reason. But not before revealing the super important information that BD is gay.
You and your husband, you're good people.
Some people say some things that don't matter because they either already said them or they just don't matter. And then B.D. Wong sees some leaves move in an unnatural fashion and a shadow move across the patio. His eyes bronze over and he tips his chair to bash his head in on the fireplace stonework. Later, Olympia sets up shop next to Mallory so their babies can't sense their loneliness and tells her she wants to name her baby Ariel, Jasmine, or Cinderella. After walking away when Olympia refused to read the room, Mallory hears a noise that turns out to be two wax figurines having sex in a shot that reminds me of that one scene from The Road. This causes her and Tom to continue chuckling at their unspoken joy at being the prettiest people in the room, which is fair, now that B.D. Wong is dead. Mallory and the kids come across a man who beckons them ashore and then attacks the boat because he wants them to take their blindfolds off and look at the creature because
It shall cleanse the world!
at the house, the gang is running out of food, so a few of them black out the windows of BD's car and use the GPS to guide them to the supermarket that Charlie works at. Or worked at. Either way, he's still wearing the vest. At the supermarket, Tom stays the course in his quest to treat the end of the world as an opportunity to fuck a pregnant woman, and Douglas suggests that they stay at the supermarket. Also, he says this.
All of us, collectively, are making the end of the world great again!
The suggestion goes largely unexplored because it was Doug that suggested it, and because Fishfinger be crazy. So Charlie sacrifices himself. Later, Doug apologizes by saying he's never wrong, and pours Mallory a 1/4 ounce of whiskey. They share a toast to hoping there is more to people than just the assholes and the dead. The wax fornicators steal the car and are never seen or heard from again. Mallory crashes the boat and Boy goes overboard. He's fine. Everyone is fine. Tom tells Mallory a story about when he was on duty in Iraq, his squad came across a man walking his kids to school in the middle of all this shit. The radio silence we were already aware of becomes a scene transition. Olympia lets Gary in the house. Gary says that he has been holed up with some colleagues from the city where he lives when some crazies from Northwood
It's a mental institution for the criminally insane.
ambushed them and forced them to look. Oh, and the crazies didn't need blindfolds. Kind of like this guy. They said everyone needed to see. Douglas tells Gary at gunpoint to leave because he's clearly lying, and moreover, every contact the gang has had with the outside world has brought them death. But don't worry, he gets to stay because Sad Eye's crazy face hits him with a vase, and the horny linebacker locks him in the garage. In the bedroom, Olympia cries to Mallory about being soft and spoiled, and begs Mallory to take care of her baby if something happens to her. Mallory tells Boy and Girl that the rapids are the hardest thing they will ever have done, and one of them is going to have to look, so they know which direction to row. And Girl volunteers, but Mallory says she will decide who looks. Mallory and Olivia go into labor at the exact same moment, leaving Gary alone to let a little crazy out, and after literally placing all his cards on the table, he puts the birds in the freezer and opens a window. Both babies are born within seconds. Gary opens the windows in the birthing room and tears through the supporting cast as if they never meant anything to the story in the first place. He's shot with a shotgun off screen by Tom, and then nothing important happens for, you guessed it. Mallory goes scavenging and hears people driving cars like they're not blindfolded. She comes home and does sex. They wake up to hear the radio transmission from earlier, but it's unedited this time. Tom tells the kids a story about climbing a tree at their age, and Mallory yells at him about giving them hope for a happy life. He says,
life is more than just what is, it's what could be, what you could make it. You need to promise some dreams that may never come true.
She says,
Every single decision I have made has been for them. Every single one.
The next day, they all go scavenging together and share a Pop-Tart. The car drivers arrive, and Tom tells Mallory to take the kids out through the back while he distracts the crazies. He tears off his Iraqi guy's necklace and gives it to Mallory and says,
Love you so much.
Outside, Tom says fuck it and takes off his blindfold. He gets all but one of the crazies before he sees a creature. His eyes bronze over, and then he shoots the last crazy before shooting himself. Mallory and the kids set off on the river. When they reach the rapids, Mallory flashes back to 5 years earlier and yesterday, and nothing in between. Then she decides no one should look after all. The boat capsizes, and then everyone is fine. They continue on foot, following the sound of the birds mentioned on the radio, and get separated with their blindfolds on as the monsters begin speaking to them, and then everyone is fine. Then they find a tiny building in the middle of the woods that could only be reached by river, and it's a school for the blind. And it's fucking huge. Then they let the birds go. Mallory's ultrasound tech is there, and she's fine. Mallory names girl Olympia after the sweetest girl she ever met. And boy is named Tom now. And I am your mother. Now go play. Now, quite a bit has already been made about the surface level problems that make this movie not work. So let's just quickly roll through some of the questions that this movie has left people wondering about. This is an interesting question because I think the answer is actually yes and no. Yes, the movie inexplicably structures itself so that every source of tension or mystery the movie could have had is rendered effectively useless. Yes, this is probably the most frustrating part of actually trying to watch the movie, and obviously, yes, if the structure allowed any opportunity to actually care about anyone's well-being or, God forbid, be surprised by anything, then the movie might operate on a more industry standard level. But would this change, forsaking the double timeline structure, make the movie better in any meaningful way? What this question really comes down to for me is, why didn't they show it? Was it a conscious decision made in order to impart some intended subtextual meaning? I mean, movie monsters that appear differently to different characters have become something of a trend in modern horror. So the mythos is kind of already pieced together, offering implied meaning to even the suggestion of the trope and lessening the pressure to meaningfully adapt the source material. You don't have to show the monster for it to have meaning, but not showing the monster is not in itself meaningful. Especially when the story you intended to tell did include a designed monster that you decided to cut out because Sandra Bullock couldn't stop laughing at it. To be fair, we did see the guy on the river and Fishfinger both have the ability to lure people in with false pretenses, even though their plans were clearly not as complicated and they were nowhere near as able to bide their time as Gary was. I think this is more of a poorly conveyed wrinkle to the story rather than a complete breaking of the internal logic. Kind of like how the characters insisted on talking about their loved ones in the present tense, but only some of the time. Greg's husband is an architect, but Lydia was Doug's wife. Well, the writer probably wanted to convey that the situation hadn't quite sunk in for these characters and there was an intentional sense of denial going on. But while the idea is there, it comes off as more of a poorly explored afterthought. Yeah, I know. That was pretty dumb. Actually, no, I have some thoughts on that. Okay, let's just back up for a second, because I think this is one of the more heinous things to come out of this movie, but let's just give me a minute. We need to establish some things first. So Bird Box is a movie that relies heavily on its central conceit. There are monsters preying on people by appearing as their worst nightmares or whatever, and looking at the monster makes you kill yourself. The comparisons are not difficult to surmise, being a pretty transparent amalgamation of other movies that are, in one form or another, still culturally relevant. This in and of itself is fine. Narrative stories of any kind are pretty commonly built off this kind of elevator pitch style shorthand, especially in genre fiction. It's a perfectly acceptable way to take a thing people like, or a thing people are talking about, and put your own spin on it. A method whose success is really determined by how an artist reassembles the pilfered parts into a new whole. In other words, making a Frankenstein's monster doesn't work if he's just a patchwork of various skins and muscle. To bring him to life, one must also bring to the table a brain.
Are you puking?
Just go to the car.
Is it chunky?
So let's consider how Bird Box goes about reassembling its primary elements in its own image by examining what those elements are and how they worked originally versus how they have been retooled. And just as an aside, I don't care when the book was written or what the author may or may not have been influenced by. Some of the movies this one is piggybacking off of may not have come out at the time the book was written. But to be clear, I am critiquing the process by which this was assembled to be sold. A process the book's author had nothing to do with. So if you want to whinge about the integrity of the adaptation overshadowing shitty derivative elements that are purely coincidental, keep in mind that the author sold the rights to the book, divorcing himself from the adaptation. And when asked what he hoped the filmmakers would do with his material, he said, "I hope they don't show the monster." Okay, so the most obvious parallel to be drawn here is probably Pennywise the Clown from Stephen King's It. Definitely a concept with some clout in the relevance department, given an extremely successful reboot and a well-documented sequel on the way. Pennywise plays on the fears of the main characters by appearing as contextually relevant manifestations to each. But the comparison is a little stunted. After all, the only character to kill himself over Pennywise is Stan, and that takes 30 years to happen. Pennywise's brand of fear is more surface level. He's a boogeyman with some really elaborate masks. I think the more appropriate comparison is to the monster from It Follows. This is a monster that appears to its victims as manifestations of various broader concepts. Where Pennywise takes the form of a leper to scare a hypochondriac, the monster from It Follows isn't quite so on the nose. Sometimes its appearance exploits a direct fear, as in a neglectful family member or a watchful stranger. Sometimes it represents a broader, less defined fear, like demonstrative masculinity or demonized naivete. It alternates between intimidation and deception, but it is relentless and hunting. Bird Box takes this concept and merely hints at its practical application. The writer errs on the side of caution. In an interview with Slash Film, he discussed the conversations he would have with the writing staff about possible versions of the monster, stating, "There was always someone else in the room who would say, 'Well, that isn't scary to me.' So it defeated the purpose, and we kept pulling back." That, coupled with the abandoned design they ended up with, turns the decision to keep the monster hidden into a non-decision. They just couldn't come up with anything. That sounds judgmental, I suppose, but there it is. The appearance of the monster in either film is inherently secondary on a textual level to the threat that it imposes. But the invocation of the thing, what it actually is an opportunity for the writer to make a point, to lay the foundation for a conversation surrounding his work. It Follows created a monster to represent the scattered, discomforting anxieties of a young girl's budding sexuality. Bird Box takes the fears and anxieties of its protagonist, a strong-willed woman having doubts about her worth as a mother, and reduces them to literal whispers in the wind. Don't look at the monster. Don't take off your blindfold.
If I find that you have, I will hurt you.
A Quiet Place was a movie about monsters that hear every noise you make, and the ramifications of that reality for conscientious parents. In a world with such an oppressively narrow acceptable path, and such a swift and punishing standard response to deviations from the norm, how does one raise a child to see wonder in their world? Or in who they are? How does one maintain a marriage, a household, a sense of self when the world in which you cultivated those things is now ruled by blind, ravenous monsters, endlessly seeking to devour anything with the audacity to be heard? Does one simply find new ways to express love, or does one stand up and fight? And that's not a particularly deep dive into that film, by the way. I think the fact that it's John Krasinski's baby just serves to more pointedly drive home the film's political leanings. I mean, he's basically a woke, brawny man at this point. And it's by no means a perfect movie. If I had to sum up my feelings about it in one word, it would probably be neat. As in, gee, Grandpa, your collection of Civil War weaponry sure is neat. It's a thing that says more about the person behind it than it does about the thing itself. This just also happens to be a movie that illustrates very cleanly an integration of theme in design. So, what are the themes of Bird Box? Parenting? Well, our main character is struggling with the idea of being a mother. She feels isolated, disenfranchised, and perhaps most importantly, she feels that she lacks the emotional capacity to love a child, presumably due to a childhood that lacked in said love. She spends the entire movie being confronted by and passively avoiding challenges to her apathy, going so far as to name them boy and girl, which I'm sure reads a lot less lame than it sounds. Until she's finally forced to make a decision. They're at the rapids. Someone has to look. But, do they, though? The decision to have no one look provides them with no more safety or guidance than they would have had otherwise, and it turns out everybody's fine. There are no consequences to this decision, and moreover, no evidence that there even could have been. She didn't get lucky taking the right turn when the river diverges, because it doesn't. So why make such a big deal out of needing someone to navigate? And what is the deal with the guy on the radio saying that his safe place can only be reached by river, and that the trip probably can't be completed with kids? It turns out there are tons of kids there. Presumably, since it's been 5 years and you've established the river as the safest route to you, some of those kids came by river. And even if not, what extra danger or burden is presented by children being on the journey? It's been 5 years of blindfolds and canned goods. I have to assume we've moved on from the cliched commiseration of are we there yet road trip horror stories. This isn't, hey kids, we can't afford Disney World this year, so instead we're gonna go see the Grand Canyon. It's the fucking apocalypse, Roger. And you're advertising a safe haven with the slogan, leave your kids at home. I'm sorry. I don't normally get caught up in these things. For someone who loves to analyze and talk about movies, I'm usually pretty generous when it comes to just having to pass the eye test. But this whole sequence was really hard to watch without thinking, this is fucking stupid. Just get out and walk. You don't even need your fishing line to mark your path. There's a fucking river. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that the film really wants you to see some profound change in Mallory when she decides that no one should look. This is the culmination of her character arc, where she realizes that she has it inside her to be a good mother. A phrase whose definition is both vague and incredibly condescending in this movie, by the way. But how is it a change?
Every single decision I have made has been for them. Every single one.
Yeah, that's probably true. I mean, I don't know for sure. I skipped 5 years of your story. But you certainly seem to provide protection, education, food, clothes, shelter. You prioritized their needs in a motherly fashion while out scavenging, and were honest and stern about the reality of their situation. And somehow this is where the movie really puts its foot down. The unforgivable sin that Mallory must atone for on the river. is that she runs a tight ship. Being a parent is something that was thrust upon her, and though she rises to the occasion in every way, we cannot be allowed to accept that she loves her children because their names are boy and girl. Now look, I am fine with the implication that those names were given because she was emotionally detached from them at the time that she named them. It's like when your daughter wins a fish at the carnival. You know it's going to die in like a week, so you name it Fish to help her stay a little less attached. But a week later when it does die, she's still sad. And so are you a little bit because she still loved it. And because Fish is still a fucking name. And what started as a way to create emotional distance becomes a galvanizing foundation for your unique and specific relationship. It's been 5 years, movie, and Fish is still alive. Give the woman a break. Oh, and while we're at it, fuck Tom too. If you want to give your kids a glimmer of hope and fun, tell them stories about sledding down the stairs or creating couch forts. Don't tell them that the most fun thing they will ever have heard of is climbing trees. There's 1,000 of them right outside where they can't go because they'll die. You're not providing hope or fun. You're creating a ticking time bomb. Shit, where was I? So there's a lot to draw on in the comparison between this movie and A Quiet Place. So much so that we're going to come back to it in a little bit. I almost made the whole video just about that, since it's been so heavily associated with it since it came out. But I couldn't stop there. After all, it's not the only movie people love comparing it to. Bird Box takes a lot of cinematic cues from The Happening. I shouldn't have to explain why this was a bad idea. I guess kudos for not also adopting the whole nature's wrath thing. Though I'm not sure Wrath of the Unknown is any better. I'm pretty sure it's worse. Alright, so everything is derivative. That's not a cynical or a poignant observation, it's just a fact. Everything, from movies to political campaigns to city planning, things you love, things you hate. Doesn't matter. Derivation is how stuff happens. It's a neutral term describing a simple fact of life. So why am I demonizing this movie for doing it, and why now, specifically? Well, because I find malice in it. Here, now. Don't get me wrong, none of this is new. It's not unique to movies, and it's not unique to now, but for some reason, this was kind of the one for me. The one that finally tipped the scales into absurdity. It's a blatant mishandling of the fundamental understanding between the consumer and the maker of a product. And by maker, I don't mean the film crew or cast. They made a bad movie, but bad movies happen. A lot. More than good ones. It's not a sin to make a bad movie, nor is it a cause for concern. Sandy Bullock's been on a tear in that department, and I find no existential terror in the implications of that. But Bird Box isn't just a bad movie. It's a successful movie. A hugely successful movie.
Great again! Yeah!
Now I'm going to preface the rest of this video by stating outright the speculative nature of everything I am about to say. I want to do this because I recognize that this is not on an immediately functional level a conversation. I am talking and you are listening. And no concession that I make to that fact is going to change the authoritative, YouTubian tone with which I deliver my thoughts. So before I continue, I officially disclaim that I am not an expert, an academic, nor a holder of any particular skinny on the persons or systems with which I am about to take umbrage. Okay, I'm going to talk about Netflix now. But I don't want to do it from the comfort of this home field advantage, meaning that if you're still watching this video, or if you even found it in the first place, chances are good that you love movies too, and all I'm doing is fanning flames. I think that subscription-based streaming services are creating a growing problem for the relationship between filmmakers and film fans, a problem that is not necessarily all that easy to explain to someone who views movies from a more passive, less fanatic level. So, imagine you're a huge fan of hammers. They're your thing. To most people, hammers are a thing that hits nails in. And that's fine. But to you, there's more to be appreciated. Hammers are a tool that literally helped build and shape the world as we see it today. And you find importance in that. Beauty, even. You may be into carpentry or construction, or maybe you just really like punching holes in some drywall. Whatever the purpose, hammers are where it's at for you. You've got a favorite type, favorite brand, even a favorite store you go to get your hammers. Kyle works there, and Kyle's cool. Kyle gets it. You hear about a new type of store they've just opened across the street that just charges you a subscription to get in, and otherwise everything's free. And they've got hammers too, so you check it out. The subscription's pretty cheap after all, and they do have some decent hammers as well as some other things you enjoy. But it seems mostly like a place for cheap rentals and reruns of The Office. Turns out, though, that this store has gained so many subscribers that a bunch of other stores are adopting the same subscription-based model. And in order to encourage more loyalty from their shoppers, they're not just going to sell hammers. They're gonna make them too. No harm, you suppose. I mean, nothing much has really changed. You've still got your store with the hammers you love. The cheap subscriptions are frankly still a bargain for the few things those stores do carry. And you've still got Kyle. Hammers are still a thing that hits nails in, you think? And that's fine. One day, you're chilling in your dad's basement, punching holes in the drywall, when you come across a news article on your phone talking about a new hammer at the store across the street that everyone's talking about. 45 million subscribers, it says, have checked out this hammer, and it's all the rage. So you head over there and check it out, only to find something very strange. This new hammer is made of solid gold. That's odd, you think, as you take the rather silly-looking hammer for a spin. You hit a few nails in with perhaps a touch more effort than is usually necessary, and think, well, I guess it's a hammer. After all, the nails are in. And then you notice that the head is full of dents from the nails you hit, and you think, now this is just silly. What were they thinking making a hammer out of solid gold? So you go to Kyle, and the two of you share a nice laugh at the expense of the silly thing. And Kyle says, hey, check out these videos I found on the internet of people using their golden hammers. And so you watch. You watch as people use the thing as a dinner fork, as a toilet plunger, as a marital aid. This thing, this so-called hammer, being used and enjoyed as anything but the thing it is supposed to be. A literal perversion of the thing you hold so dear, and you think, my God, is nothing sacred? What's wrong with you people? Can't you see that you're killing hammers? That this godforsaken monstrosity will only be repeated and redressed ad nauseum? Thanks to your utter disregard for your responsibility to use your role in a supply and demand system to maintain any semblance of equilibrium, of fucking quality control? I mean, I hope you like movies about monsters with orange hair and tiny hands, because that's what you're gonna get. Goodbye subtlety, goodbye craft and imagination. Bird Box is a phenomenon whose time will come and go. In fact, I'd wager that by the time I publish this video, it will have already run its course, rendering my bile more than a little hokey. And I still can't help but be a little alarmed that a company like Netflix, slated to spend over $13 billion on new content this year alone, proving that a valid litmus test for a movie's success needn't be what we pay, what we write, or what we shout into a cheap microphone for 35 minutes. but instead our viral desire to make meaningless, self-aggrandizing memes from it. So I started this video by mimicking, among other things, a much, much better video made by Evan Pushak, the nerd writer, about the movie Passengers, where he pondered a solution to a bad film as opposed to shitting all over it for half an hour. So, as a nod of good faith to him and all of the other creators that I ripped off here, I'm going to finish on a particularly perfect sentiment from Evan himself, because he already said it better. Here's hoping that there's more to people than just the assholes and the dead. And for the rest, hopefully there's a lesson in there somewhere.
Because you can learn just as much from films that don't work as you can from those that do.
So I had this idea originally to make the joke that the monster in the movie was the movie. You know, that Bird Box is the thing that if you see it, blah, 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 blah. But as most things written on bar napkins and shitty B-movie premises tend to do, it got a lot less profound the next morning. I don't know, I guess I didn't want to create a visual representation of a thing that at first sight makes someone kill themselves for yuck yucks. I mean, The Happening had more class than that.